I'm Amy Nickerson, the host of today's workshop, which is intended to explore this phenomenon of what happens when you enter a period of a career transition or thinking about making a career change. And when I left the University of Vermont a few years ago, I was not prepared for the transition that took place in who I was. For 15 years, I had been on faculty, and for 14 of those years, I had been the director of a graduate program. And when I left the university, suddenly I felt like, oh my gosh, who am I? Because suddenly I had no routine, I had no sense of what my purpose was. And that's what I'd like to talk with all of you about today. To say that I was floundering is an understatement. So I'm hoping that I can help other people be prepared for this transition. So today's focus is really to talk about this phenomenon of an identity shift that happens during a career transition. And I'd like to just be really clear that what I mean by a transition in the career realm is that you're ready to change the nature of the work you do, change sectors. Perhaps you've been out on a leave for caregiving or a sabbatical. And also, too, another huge transition that we don't talk about very much is the transition into retirement. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people are done working, but it's another transition point. So these transitions bring on a sense of your confidence is shaken. For men and women, there are some similarities, but the identity loss is different for women. And I want to help you find ways to hang on to your identity as you move forward. So, in order to have a sense of who the identities are at the table here today, I have a Menti poll that I'll put on the next slide here for you. And when you think about answering the question, I want to introduce this concept that we all have many selves, right? So, I'm a mother, I'm a cross-country skier, I'm a bike rider. And so I'd like you to think about that as you answer this Menti poll. Think about words that come to mind and just go ahead and start jotting down all the different selves that you bring to the table every day. It could be a mother, it could be a financial analyst, it can be your professional selves, it can be your personal selves, it can be your day-to-day, this is what you do. Okay, we have some people who identify as a friend. That's probably a more common identity, a persona. Mother, wife, a nature lover. The reason I think it's important to stop and think about who all of your different selves are is that keep those in mind as you're moving forward through your career transition. These are parts of who you are. For example, if you are in the creative sphere of you like to paint, well, perhaps that's speaking to the work that you choose to do next or that you find yourself exploring, that a creative part of it may be something to pay attention to. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's an interesting one, a lost soul. Perhaps you are in this space having some questions about your identity, and going through a career transition doesn't help with that. All right, so this idea of career transition, it can bring on many fears and concerns, especially among women. I wanted to include the list so that you see that it's not just limited to the fear of identity loss, but also there's the fear of financial instability. Can I afford to make these changes? Women especially experience this imposter syndrome, wondering if they have what it takes to do the job that they're pursuing. Also, too, what will people think if I do something different? It's very interesting to see the reactions of people, friends and family and coworkers, who might be kind of surprised that you're thinking about making a change, and that can start to instill some self-doubt in you as well. And then there's the feeling of fear of failing, and I think that's pretty pronounced across gender roles. So this fear of identity loss, who am I without my role? It's almost a sense of erasing yourself. It's perfectly normal during any transition. This identity loss is not a sign of failure in any way. It's more a sign of growth, that you are evolving as a person and that your identity is not disappearing. So let's talk a little bit about your shifting identity. Suddenly you don't have a title, you don't have a routine, no conference speaking engagements. This comes up, and I experienced it, is when you go from being a source of expertise in your particular field to suddenly be stepping outside of that, not being a part of a panel presentation or actually delivering some important content to your colleagues, I felt a sense of loss, that I didn't have a purpose at some of these professional meetings anymore. The other thing is your network begins to change. And it was hard for me to believe that that would be so pronounced. But when you're not in the space with other people on the day to day and you don't have a common goal, people do start to fall out of your network. And that's a whole nother challenge and adds to this sense of who am I? So you're in this space of who were you and now who are you becoming? I put together this little schema to just show that when you're in the midst of changing your identity, there's the old self. For me, it was for the previous 15 years, having been a member of the faculty, and then also the director of this graduate program. I hadn't reached my new self yet, and there is this very uncomfortable in transition period. There's a name for that. It's called the liminal phase or the liminal space, where you've left the old self, but you haven't reached the new self. And if you think about the definition of the word transition, it's to be in transit. You're going from somewhere to somewhere else. You haven't reached that somewhere else destination yet. And this place, this space in the middle, your transition space, this liminal space, it's very messy. It's uncomfortable. People can be stalled in this place because you really, without a clear sense of who I am, who you are in this process, it can be easy to just start treading water and not going forward. So you're holding on to the old and you have to let go at the same time. And that puts you in this space of, I'm not here, I'm not there. I kind of feel like I'm sitting on the fence. So here are some common challenges, and this speaks to what's behind the identity loss that happens when you are entering a phase of career change or a career transition. First of all, there's the lack of structure and role clarity. Think about the routines that you have when you are in a particular position. When you have to show up for work, you know where you're going to show up for work, whether it's online or it's in physical space, and you can anticipate who you might be having interaction with. Then there's this sense of, well, what's my purpose? My purpose was no longer to prepare the next generation of nutrition professionals at the University of Vermont. What was my purpose now? And again, because I have many selves, I had a sense of purpose with the different aspects of my life, but not professionally. And that really didn't feel great. Also, too, this whole idea about how your networks can start to change without having colleagues that you're working with every day. You start to question your validation, what it is you're doing, how well you're doing it. This can lead to an erosion of your confidence. And without having this sense of a collegial network on the day to day in your former or current position, thinking about moving on to something else, you lose some feedback. And for me, that was another big challenge because when you're teaching, you get immediate feedback every day. Your experience is validated just by looking at the faces in the classroom of students. When you look at a sea of faces that are bored, you immediately have to switch gears in that space and find a different approach to teaching whatever the concept is. Well, you don't have that kind of immediate feedback when you are in a career transition. And then anytime we try something new, perhaps in the reinvention of yourself, it's very risky and it can rattle you to your core. So, why is this a little bit more of a challenge for women than men? Um, there's the role expectations. Women are always pushing ourselves to do it better, to make sure we stand out. And that's historically what's happened in the workplace in order to reach leadership positions, for example. So there's an intense pressure to meet everybody's expectations and do it all. And also this validation. No longer can you say, I am. Your narrative is changing, and you have to think about what is your new narrative. But let's talk about strategies to preserve your identity. First of all, I just want to make sure that it's clear that you are not your job title. You're way more than your job title. So, one of the challenges that you face is to separate your role from yourself. How do you do that? Well, you can think about what your core values are and what your strengths are. Some people in a career transition process forget about all of the transferable skills and strengths that they bring forward with them. They really do travel with you. And as far as values are concerned, it's important to continue to reconnect with your core values because as we age, as we move from one career position to another, our values change. And so if you're still operating under the values that you had 15 or 20 years ago, you might find that it's time to revisit what those are so that you don't go into a position that doesn't align with your core values. Also, it's important to think about what do you want to carry forward. Again, your values are the overarching framework to carry forward with yourself, but there's also things that you want to leave behind as well. That's going to require some reflection. Stay connected. It's important to surround yourself with people who believe in your process. You might be surprised at who is really cheerleading for you, and then others who want to be devil's advocate and they're going to challenge you to really defend what it is that you're setting out to do. And then lastly, to think about redefining what success means to you. Again, as we grow older, it's not necessarily the titles or the salary that brings us a sense of meaning and fulfillment as much as what is your purpose and the impact that you're having on the world. Also, too, it's important to expand your network. Reach out to people who are doing what you might like to do. LinkedIn is a great space to start searching around for who is doing what you think you might like to do. That's just a starting point. The next bullet might surprise you. Who's on your advisory board? Well, this is not a nonprofit and it's not an ad hoc group from perhaps work that you're doing. When I made the transition from being on faculty at UVM to being an entrepreneur, I tapped into 3 or 4 colleagues who we had worked together well in the latter part of my tenure. And they were who kept my head together. They were great for bouncing ideas off of. They were supportive. They challenged me when they didn't understand or they had questions about the wisdom of a particular direction that I was thinking about going in. And it was a very informal group. It evolved organically. And I encourage you to create your own little informal advisory board, to have a few people to use as a springboard for your thoughts and your ideas, as well as to help you keep your boundaries, remind you what you're setting out to do. Next, create a plan, be strategic. There's fascinating research about people who set goals and write them down are more likely to achieve their goals because when you write a goal, you're actually committing to working towards that goal rather than to just have it be an idea. Experiment with small steps in a different direction. Try a side hustle. You can volunteer. You could do some shadowing. And then also update your education and training if there are skill gaps that you need to close up. And then, most importantly, is to build small wins into your transition and celebrate them because the celebration of small wins keeps you inspired and your momentum going. All right, so now what? Step number one, I encourage you to do some reflection. And here are some prompts to get you started. And I have a worksheet that will help you really jot down some thoughts in a more structured way. But these are just some of the questions that I think are very important to be thinking about. And then the fourth bullet there is commit to taking one small step this week that will help you reconnect with your authentic self. Now, if all of this sounds like it's a little overwhelming, I have a program to offer you that is coming up very soon. This is my 5-step career transition coaching program, and I'm offering it at a one-time discounted price for $499. The usual price is $780. And there are only 10 slots available. I want to keep the group small so that everybody feels like they get the attention that they're seeking. And if you participate in this, it will help you navigate this chapter of career transitioning faster than if you do it on your own, because you'll be committing to a process and you'll have others who are in the group with you trying to achieve the same thing. And you'll also have me who will keep you inspired in a friendly way. The link is at the bottom of this slide. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you've taken away a couple of little nuggets that might help you with this sense of identity loss that can be so common during a career transition. Reach out on LinkedIn. Bye-bye.